Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts About the 40K Universe. I am your host, Gershwan, and today we're going to be talking about the Thousand Suns. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. We push Warhammer 40K lore videos every single day. If you have any suggestions, please comment down below. And if you enjoy our content, thank our patrons on Patreon. It is because of them that we can do this. Link in the description if you guys want to support us. But with that said, let's get into 40 facts on the Warbands of the Thousand Suns. The Brothers of Retaliation are a Chaos Spacemarine warband created for the sole purpose of seeking revenge against the Imperium of Man for the damage they caused the Thousand Suns Legion and their homeworld of Prospero during the Horus Heresy. The warband is a descendant of the Thousand Suns. It is led by the now Chaos Lord, Lodran Thalaran. Lodran served with Primarch Magnus the Red as a rare but mighty chaplain of the Thousand Suns during the Great Crusade. He was one of the few Astartes assigned to this new position, created by the Edicts of the Council of Nicaea, an imperial conclave that was called on the world of Nicaea to determine whether the use of psychic powers represented a boon or a grave danger to mankind and the newborn Imperium of Man. After the Emperor rendered his decree absolute in regards to the use of psychers, the Spacemarine legions were instructed to abolish their librarious divisions. The Emperor had decreed that henceforth no legion was to employ psychers in battle, nor were psychers in service of the Imperium to continue their studies into the mysteries of psychic talents. Lodran was handpicked and assigned the responsibility of a chaplain after Malcador the Sigillite issued the Order of Observance, more commonly known as the Chaplain Edict, to ensure the spiritual well-being of the Thousand Suns Legion and enforce the psycher band. During the closing years of the Great Crusade, while meditating at the Thousand Suns homeworld of Prospero, the Primarch Magnus the Red psychically foresaw that his brother, the War Master Horus, would be corrupted by the malignant influence of the ruinous powers. His vision showed him the future events of the Horus Heresy, the betrayal of the Emperor by half the Spacemarine legions, and the sundering of the Imperium by the tumultuous and costly interstellar civil war. Gathering the Rahati, the inner coven of advisors that were comprised of the Crimson King's most trusted confidants, Lodran was one of the few who wanted to notify the Emperor about Magnus's suspicion of Horus. After an eloquent speech by Lodran to his Primarch and the highest-ranking officers of the Legion, they decided to inform the Emperor by enacting a sorcerous ritual to convey the news of the impending civil war to the Emperor himself on Terra, rather than using the far slower but legal means of astro-telepathy. Using an astral projection spell, the spirit of Magnus the Red hurtled towards Terra through the warp, bringing the dire news to his father. It was perhaps a little too hard for Lodran to understand the Emperor's response when he sent the Space Wolves Legion, who brought sword and flame to destroy his homeworld. Reluctantly, Lodran fought against the former cousin Spacemarine Legion in the defense of his home planet during the fall of Prospero. The Imperial assault by the Pharaoh warriors of the Space Wolves Legion took the Thousand Suns completely by surprise. Though the Thousand Suns fought ferociously against the Space Wolves, they were no match for the sheer ferociousness of this legion. With only a few thousand surviving Astartes left alive, the Thousand Suns were pushed back to the center of their planet capital of Tisca, the City of Light. Facing their inevitable destruction, the Crimson King finally joined the fight and fought alongside his sons in a desperate but ultimately futile last stand. This culminated in a confrontation between Magnus and his brother Leman Russ in a fight to the death. Mortally wounded, the Thousand Suns Primarch pledged his soul to the service of the Chaos God of Change and Sorcery, Tzeentch, in return for aid in saving his legion. The response of Magnus's new patron was immediate. The City of Light was transported into the Eye of Terror to a demon world that had already been prepared for its new occupants. Following the confrontation with the Space Wolves, reluctantly, Lodran followed his Primarch into damnation, as Magnus eventually joined with War Master Horus's cause, and the rest, as they say, is history. Yet Lodran survived the Horus Heresy, and during his exile on the planet of the Sorcerers, Lodran's bitterness grew immeasurably. His adored Primarch had changed into a foul mutation of chaos. Many of his brothers were almost hideously mutated by the energies of the Eye of Terror. Their once proud legion had degenerated into a rabble of honorless scum who were forced to fight for their mere existence. Lodran would never forgive nor forget the betrayal and humiliation that befell the once noble Thousand Suns. About 1,000 standard years after Horus's death, Thalaran fled the planet of the Sorcerers, and hundreds of loyal battle brothers followed him. They conquered an ancient crone world of the Eldar and built a huge fortress, the Black Cathedral. From this base, Lodran's followers began to recruit thousands of hopeful disciples, and a few solar decades later, a huge city had sprung up around the Black Cathedral. Lodran became a mighty Chaos Lord, and renamed his followers the Brothers of Retaliation. Throughout the millennia, Loldrin has drawn many different forces to his banner. 2 demon princes are his confederates, along with hundreds of Chaos Space Marines, thousands of Chaos cultists, renegades, and demons, all at his disposal. And so the Brothers of Retaliation wait for their time of vengeance against the Corpse Emperor. The Chaos Warband, known as the Mind Eaters, is a thrall band of the Thousand Sons Traitor Legion. This traitor successor chapter is led by the sorcerer Hazaphat, a magister who received visions from the Chaos God of Change. In these visions, Tzeentch laid out a potential future where the magister consumed the thoughts and memories of an entire world, and by doing so, ascended to demonhood. This Tzeentch-ordained destiny would only be achieved if Hazaphat and his followers completed 999 special rites that would further the Architect of Fate's plan in the mortal realm. The Mind Eater Warband embarked on the first of these chaotic rites early in the 32nd millennium, with the hopes that the journey would end in apotheosis. The Mind Eater's journey would be a long and grueling one, filled with death and destruction, but one of the most notable rites occurred late in the 41st millennium, when an endless psychic scream lured the sorcerer warlord of the Night Lords, Vasilix the Shrouded, to the mind world of Xanthamatos. As his warband set about butchering the Imperial war crews, the terror of those slain continued to linger in the form of disembodied warp geists. The sight of spectral figures crowding the minds and howling with fear blinded Vasilix to the true sorcery at play, for the planet had been hexbound by Hazaphat and his Mind Eaters. As the warlord reveled in the resonant terror, the Mind Eaters sealed the minds with the Night Lords still inside. In the final twist of Hazaphat's curse, the spirits of the dead burst into warp flames, filling the subterranean tunnels with screaming flame. By the time the mines were reopened, every last Night Lord had been reduced to ash, all except Vasilix the Shrouded, whose body was melted into a lump of dark crystal. The crystallized remains of the warlord was Hazaphat's goal. Calling it the Shrouded Crystal, it pulsed with the raw psychic energies of the sorcerer it once was. This gruesome relic was asked for by Tzeentch as the 765th rite. Very few reports exist of the Mind Eater's actions after this event, which became known as the Crystallized Night. The next major action occurred many years later, when the Warband undermined the millennia-long battle plan of Korthafos. Korthafos was a particularly powerful Chaos Sorcerer of the Thousand Sons Traitor Legion. Sometimes referred to as an exalted sorcerer, he was a practitioner of the cult of magic, which meant he was dedicated to the pure and unfettered use of sorcery. Infuriated that his plan was thwarted by Hazaphat, the exalted sorcerer challenged the presumably less powerful sorcerer to a psychic duel. As the two locked minds in combat, it was clear that Korthafos was the more powerful psyker, but Hazaphat unsheathed the Dagger of Reflections, acquired centuries ago during his 87th rite. The mind flames cast out by Korthafos were drawn towards the shimmering dagger before being forced back in a thunderous wave, pulverizing the brain matter of the exalted sorcerer. Korthafos began to slump over, with liquid ooze coming from his helm, but before he hit the ground, Hazaphat plunged the ensorcered dagger into his fallen opponent's chest, carving out his still beating heart. This was the trophy of his 888th rite. Finally, Hazaphat and his Mind Eaters descended upon the Imperial hive world of Mangal III, amidst an ongoing Tau invasion. Before landing, the sorcerer shattered the Shrouded Crystal in orbit, casting his shards throughout the atmosphere to summon an impenetrable darkness which surrounded the planet. Cut off from orbital reinforcements and relays, the Tau armies and Imperial Planetary Defense Forces continued to fight in utter confusion. In the Valley of Sacrifice, between the lines of the battling armies, the Mind Eaters arrayed the trophies acquired from the 998 preceding rites in a great crescent, and between the horns of the crescent, Hazaphat mounted an enormous pyre. From its pinnacle, he beheld the encroaching Tau and Imperial forces. They were to be his, their thoughts and memories devoured as had been foretold nearly 10,000 years before. Holding the hearts of Korthafos, Hazaphat ignited the pyre with their blood, incanting an oath to Tzeentch as the flames began to lap his armor. The sudden rush of psychic energy toward Hazaphat shredded the minds of hundreds of thousands of combatants on the planet, siphoning their very life force into the sorcerer. But as the Grand Conspirator's change took hold of Hazaphat, he screamed in agony. The vast armies were physically pulled towards him, like gnats caught in a thundering vortex. Ranks of screaming bodies and enormous war engines flew across the darkened land, colliding with Hazaphat, where they were quickly absorbed by his warping form. His body devoured metal and flesh with equal voraciousness as it continued to grow. Howling in excruciation from the newly forming maws, his mass pupated, not into the form of a demon prince as was expected, but to that of a muthless vortex beast. A nightmarish monstrosity and an unnatural abomination of the will of Tzeentch, Hazaphet's body rearranged itself as his muscle structure grew and split, forming a massive and fanged jaw where tendrils formed from his warped putrefied inner organs, flapping outward. The sorcerer became a true warp abomination, growing larger with each sacrifice as his hulking body became a psychic reservoir for chaos energy. The warp vortex emanating from the hideous creature extended outward with each newly consumed sacrifice until it encircled the entire planet, and with a final mind-tearing scream, the planet itself was torn from real space to become Tzeentch's new demon world. In its place, there was left only a perpetual darkness, an echo of Hazaphet's final, pitiful cry. Few within the Imperium know the origin of the Warbands' name. The few inquisitors of the Ordo Malleus that have come across the legend of these traitors within the arcane history books will understand that the name derives from the Magister's attempt to consume the minds of the warriors of Mangal III. There have been a few reports of heretical followers of the ruinous powers attempting to discover the whereabouts of the demon world created by the sacrifice of Hazaphet. Hundreds of chaotic relics gathered by the Warband throughout its almost 10,000-year-long hunt are simply laying on the demon world, hidden somewhere in Tzeentch's realm in the warp, an incredible prize for any daring heretic. While it is believed that the majority of the Mind-Eaters were consumed during the storm, there are some that believe a few Chaos Space Marines managed to escape. These would be the last of the Mind-Eaters' warband, and rumors claim that they participated in the battle for the Aspect system, a conflict that occurred recently, sometime after the Great Rift's creation. The few remaining Mind-Eaters were assisting a cabal of Thousand Sun sorcerers from the cult of manipulation as they were attempting to warp reality around the stars of the Aspen system in order to extinguish their light and engulf the system in etheric darkness. The first Imperial force tasked to stop the terrible ritual was a squad of Alora's custodians from the Adeptus Custodes. They were later joined by a Grey Knight strike force and a large contingent of Skitarii. But when they approached the Aspen system, an enormous solar flare separated the Imperial forces from each other. While the Grey Knights and Skitarii rejoined together and destroyed the profane wards sustaining the hex, the Adeptus Custodes were nowhere to be seen. In truth, the Alora's custodians had been set adrift in the warp by Aspen's solar flare and were later captured by the waiting Thousand Suns. This was the last recorded encounter of the Mind-Eaters' warband. It is unclear if the surviving traitors have named a new leader after the death of their Magister, or if they have been absorbed by one of the Thousand Suns' heretical warbands. Regardless of the tragedy of the sorcerer Hazaphet, the outcome of the warband's journey pleased the ever-scheming chaos god Tzeentch. Many of the rites performed by the Mind-Eaters are yet to be revealed, another proof of how Tzeentch treats his worshippers like pawns, and the Chaos God's amazing foresight in the great game. The Brotherhood of Dust is a Chaos Space Marine warband that consists primarily of powerful exiled Thousand Sun sorcerers founded by Amon, the former captain of the Ninth Fellowship of the Thousand Suns Legion, and the equerry of the Primarch Magnus the Red. Amon once served as the tutor to Primarch Magnus the Red before the arrival of the Thousand Sun Space Marine Legion on the world of Prospero during the Great Crusade. He eventually went on to become the Legion's first Prosperian Astarte as the direct invitation of Magnus. Amon rose through the ranks to become the captain of the Ninth Fellowship. As a potent psyker, he became the founder of the Legion's Corvidae cult and its first Magister Templi. He also served as equerry to Magnus, responsible for the Primarch's security and officiating certain sorceress rituals, among other duties. Amon would not only survive the Battle of the Great Crusade, but the raising of Prospero by the Space Wolf Legion during the early years of the Horus Heresy. At the height of this conflict, Amon witnessed the mortally wounded Magnus open a gateway through the warp into the Eye of Terror, where the demon world, Sortarius, better known as the Planet of the Sorcerers, had been prepared for Magnus and the remnants of his legion by their patron god Tzeentch. Magnus was then turned into a demon prince by Tzeentch. Following their exile into the Eye of Terror, First Captain Hazak Ahriman became hateful of their gene-sire. When the flesh change once again ran rampant amongst the survivors of the Thousand Suns, and Magnus seemed to accept it, Ahriman set out to find a cure for the rapid mutation. In his own hatred and hubris, and utterly unaware of the ludicrousness of attempting to use the very energies of change to stop change, Ahriman delved into the sorcerous knowledge held in the Book of Magnus, distilling the collection of formulas, incantations, and rites, and infusing the results with his own hatred for Magnus and the angst at the fate of his legion. Ahriman devised a canvas of mighty arcane spells that would ultimately undo the woes that had befallen their battle brothers, and thus protect them from the flesh change for all eternity. Preliminary testing of the spell, he called the Rubric, generated great promise, but he quickly discovered that he lacked the raw power required to achieve permanent results. He then set out to work, gathering those amongst the remaining officers of the Thousand Sons, who, like him, were disgusted by what had befallen their legion and their Primarch. Gathering in a circle around Ahriman, this cabal of sorcerers lent their powers to Ahriman, who then unleashed a full power of his desperate spell. Amon was amongst those who joined Ahriman's breakaway cabal, those who had always been the most headstrong and possessed of the most psychic powers in the Legion. Those that remained faithful to the Primarch were second-rate. They were the ones who had not dared to join the casting of the Rubric. The counter-sorcery affected them all, preserving less than 100 of the Legion's sorcerers and condemning the rest, known as Rubricae. They were set to dust as their physical bodies were transformed into spectral energy. In the aftermath of this catalysm, it became clear that the Rubric had either succeeded beyond all possible expectations or failed miserably, depending on how one would look at it. Ahriman, along with most of his cabal, were horrified by the result. Their brethren were now as they had intended, protected from the flesh change, though they paid for this protection with the destruction of their physical bodies. It was only later that Ahriman saw the awful truth of what he had created. Instead of purging the flesh of the ravaging mutation, each of the Thousand Sons had been transformed into unliving automatons. Magnus, angered beyond reason, assaulted the tower where Ahriman had gathered his coven. The other Chaos Sorcerers immediately knelt and abased themselves before Magnus's fury, but Ahriman remained standing, vindicated in his beliefs and utterly unrepentant. Before the Demon Primarch could strike down his former Chief Librarian, the Architect of Fate, Tzeentch himself, intervened, staying Magnus's hand. Instead, Ahriman, Amon, and the rest of his cabal were banished, exiled from the planet of the sorcerers. The exile affected Amon. Once considered one of the most loyal of Magnus's sons, Amon had been the hardest to persuade to join Ahriman's cabal, the most doubting, and the one most loyal to Primarch, besides Ahriman. He followed Ahriman, believing in him and allowing himself to dream as he did. The trust brought him the destruction of everything he held dearest. He had burned his hopes because he had trusted the former Chief Librarian. Though the Rubric of Ahriman could not be undone, Amon became convinced that the only way to save his legion was to end it all. Amon was determined to find all the secrets of the Rubric and perhaps restore some of his mindless undead brothers back to life. Over the next 1,000 standard years, as he continued to amass more power, Amon found his own powerful warband known as the Brotherhood of Dust, which consisted of many exiled Thousand Sons. He also gathered void ships, other Chaos Spacemarines, hundreds of Rubricae, and a number of apprentices, who they themselves became formidable Chaos Sorcerers in their own right. It was Amon's intent to see the suffering of his legion ended, for he would undo the fell magic of the Rubric that had doomed his former battle brothers to this unlife, so that he could release their tortured souls. Yet despite all his grand schemes and designs, he still needed a wayward Ahriman, for only he possessed the necessary knowledge of the Rubric. By direct orders of Amon, the Brotherhood of Dust maintained their pre-Horus Heresy Legion heraldry and colors of the Thousand Sons, favoring lacquer red with silver trim, as well as ornate crest on their helmets, similar to the striped cloth crowns once worn by the ancient Egyptian pharaohs of Terra. Amon sent out emissaries across the galaxy to chase rumors, no matter how minor, of the possible whereabouts of the former Thousand Sons Chief Librarian. During his quest, Amon came across other former members of the Thousand Sons. He sent his emissaries to his former brothers in the hopes of enticing them to join his warband. If they accepted, they would become part of the Brotherhood of Dust. However, those that refused faced the prospect of annihilation, both themselves and those that followed them. Eventually, Ahriman was discovered and captured by the Brotherhood of Dust. In an epic confrontation, the enraged Amon unleashed a powerful psychic attack against his former brother. During the ensuing duel, Ahriman revealed the final secret of the Rubric to his former brother. It was a part of all Thousand Sons, bound into their very being. The Rubric ran through them all, linking them sustaining them. Its power was in Ahriman's hands. Unable to pull his mind away from Ahriman, the Chaos Sorcerer caused Amon to spontaneously combust from the powerful psychic energies unleashed from this arcane spell. Amon's armor came apart, each component pulling away from the other, spilling gray dust into the turning wind. The same vortex of warp power enveloped Ahriman and lifted him into the air, the separate pieces of Amon's armor aligning itself over his unarmored splayed body. Then one plate at a time, they slipped into place over Ahriman's flesh. Finally, Amon's horned helm slipped over Ahriman's skull. The minds of the living sorcerers of the Brotherhood of Dust teetered on the edge of indecision. Raising his hands, Ahriman summoned warp flames from the floor, which scoured the red lacquer from the armor of every rubrique and sorcerer. Then the flames flickered blue, and the silver armor became polished sapphire. Ahriman looked across the ranks of blue-armored warriors. Slowly, he knelt and bowed his head. He assumed the mantle of leadership of the Brotherhood of Dust, including its massive fleet and army of followers. It is unclear in Imperial records if the Brotherhood of Dust is the same warband that now is known as the Prodigal Sons that Ahriman currently leads in the 41st millennium. And those were 40 facts in the Thousand Sons warbands. Now, obviously, this is just 3, and there's way more warbands that we need to talk about. If there is a specific Thousand Sons warband, or just any warband in general that you guys would like us to cover, please comment down below. We would love to create a video for you. It is because of you guys listening and making suggestions in the comment section below that we can create these videos. So just let us know whatever topic you guys want us to cover, and we will create a video for you. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will talk to you tomorrow. This is Gershwan with One Mind Syndicate signing out.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.